Dr. Richard Carrier. I have another Patreon question, and this one is from a gentleman named Martin Gestrel. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He says, when did Christians stop believing that the body is needed to be raised from the dead, to again receive the spirit of life for a person to be able to live forever in the kingdom of God? Compare this to the modern Christian view that a person has a soul that goes to heaven after death. And of course, why did this happen? No mention about souls going to heaven after death in the Old Testament, and conflicting narratives about such thing in the Gospels of the New Testament makes it almost crazy incoherent that just views like that would take over. Is this because the kingdom never came?
There's a scholarly book on this. Caroline Bynum actually wrote kind of the definitive book on this, because it's a book on resurrection. So look for Caroline Bynum's book, Bynum. Her book on resurrection is all about this, as to why did Christians adopt a certain view of resurrection and so forth. There are also other books about the afterlife. Alan Segal, for example, does the afterlife, talks about how changing views occurred on this. There's not really a consistent view even among Christians today about this. And the same is true in antiquity, right? There's a huge amount of division about this aspect of it. But if we start with like Paul, also it begins with the Jews, right? So the Jews are already divided. Josephus himself talks about like different views of the afterlife and how this works. When you look at Paul, and I think if you compare Paul with Origen, the Christian father, I think Origen really got Paul and understood. I think they shared a similar view. Their view was that you cannot be alive, like you can't be conscious without a body. Like the idea of you, basically like your DNA or your computer download or whatever, can sit on a disk or whatever of God's mind, so that you can continue to exist forever, but you're not conscious, you're not alive. To be alive, you have to be stamped in a material. You have to be a functioning material mechanism. And of course, Paul talks about like the superior supernatural body that you're going to get, and we'll be stamped in that body. And until that time, we're asleep. He talks about us being asleep. And so Paul's view is that, well, you can't be conscious without a body. And in his view, like the body you die in is a piece of junk, so why would you want it back? In his view, is God's going to give you these super angelic bodies that are like invincible and glorious and all this stuff. And then you basically just be uploaded into those new bodies. It's like Heaven's Gate cult or something like that is the idea. But that's not the only Jewish, and it was a Jewish idea. There were many sects that held that view that Paul did. But that wasn't the only view. There was the view that there was a separable soul. And you find this, for example, in the Old Testament, where a spirit could be summoned from its corpse. So there's the Witch of Endor, for example, is that you could actually like cast certain magics and pull someone's soul up. And it's this sort of, it's like a wraith. It's like a phantom in Greek and Homeric ideas, which leads to the soul idea in Plato, which Christians started loving Plato, and so they adopted the Platonic idea of the soul. That's how the soul gets into Christianity, is through Platonism and their love of Platonism. Platonism was the one philosophy that they thought agreed the most with their theology, and so that's how it became popular. And so that's how it became mainstream. This idea that now you have this soul that can go live in heaven or whatever and wait for bodies. And so then the question is like, well, why do you need the bodies then? Why can't you just be Casper? Now, the Greeks answered this question is that the souls couldn't touch, so couldn't feel physical pleasure, couldn't eat, and so basically that it was a shitty way of living, right? Is incomplete. The blessed were the ones who got bodies to go, these divine bodies got to go live in the nice part of Hades, right? There was always some sort of secret place that you could find. The mystery cults often had like coded messages to give to the guardians inside the afterworld that would lead you so your soul could get to the right place, and then you would get your glorious heroic body. And so even the Greeks thought you had to have a physical body to actually enjoy life, but you could be conscious without a body. It's just a lesser existence. And I think that's largely what the Christians adopted. Now this gets into like what was the medieval afterlife belief and stuff, and I know less about that, so I can't really comment on that. But I think that's what happened, is this, I think, the adoption of the idea that a life without a body is incomplete. And so even if you have a soul that can float around and hang out in heaven or whatever, it's still going to be missing something, and so you still need the resurrection for that. But there are Christians today who don't even believe that, right? Who think like, no, once you're in heaven, that's it. You don't need a new body. You have a new body. It's in heaven, and you just stay there. There's no like general resurrection. The rapture is people just get sucked up into heaven and get transformed. into the same bodies that the people already in heaven have. And so there's a lot of different Christian doctrines on this.
I was going to say, it almost seemed like to me when I went to church, many Christians, I can't read everybody's mind, but it seemed to me that the whole, like, I got to get back into a certain body was irrelevant at many Christians, I think, aren't really overly concerned about this needing this physical or even another literal body.
Yeah.
They die, their soul or whatever their essence is goes, and it's in heaven. And they don't really think about like, all right, while I'm there, do I have to eat? Now, when they do think about it, they're not thinking, I need to be inserted into a body, because textually and doctrinally, like, there aren't many theological minded Christians that are like, I need to be doctrinally correct.
These debates exist, but it's a fringe few that are really concerned about it. Most rank and file Christians don't really think about this and don't really have opinions about it. Yeah.
It's a fun question, though, and I really appreciate your question. I hope I didn't butcher your name. And thank you, Dr. Carrier. I hope people go support us. He has a Patreon. I have a Patreon. Of course, as you know, I'm taking your question. And then we have courses coming out. So you're going to want to stay tuned to Dr. Richard Carrier's courses here on MythVision's platforms. And stay tuned. Thank you.